Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm one of the NICU nurses at Cedars, and I'm going to talk about bedtime for baby. And feel free to interrupt at any time. I just want it to be like a informal type conversation. So some tips for safe sleep for your baby. I'm sure you guys all know you always want to put baby back to sleep. And so newborns sleep every 14 to 17 hours in 24 hours. You want to wake up your baby every about 3 to 4 hours to feed them. And it's okay if you kind of stretch it out a little bit longer at night, as long as they're getting a little bit extra during their feeding, and you can maybe stretch it out to 4 hours instead of 3. And then if you're
jump in for 1 second. Mm-hmm. When you first go home from the NICU, the baby's going to still probably be on the NICU schedule, like Jenny's saying, every 3 to 4 hours. But once you get to probably about 5 or 6 months, then they're going to have longer periods of sleeping. And that's okay, as long as they're getting 8 feedings in a day. Or if they're doing big feeds, you can do probably 6 feeds a day. So if they're going to take 4, 5, 6 ounces, you can probably do less than 8 feedings in a day, as long as they're getting a certain amount. Remember how when we were in the NICU, we calculated all the volumes, and we were making sure that they were getting enough for how much they were growing. So it's kind of like the similar thing. Kind of assess how they're eating. If they're eating a lot more, you can probably do a less feeding and let them sleep a little bit longer. But when you're first home from the NICU, they're too young to be able to have those long periods of sleep. They're going to need to have the night feedings for the first at least 1 to 2 months that they're home.
And then if you're breastfeeding, you might want to try supplement with a bottle after to see if they're still hungry, because sometimes you don't really know how much they're getting at the breast. And then if you don't want to waste your milk, warm up a whole bottle of your own milk and then they don't drink it, you can try formula instead, and that way if they don't drink it, it's fine.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you're doing that and then your baby spits it all up,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean he's full? Or I'm having a hard time figuring out, because right now we're doing cluster feeding and I'm losing my mind a little.
If they spit up the whole entire feed, that would probably be a call to the pediatrician. But if they just spit up a little bit,
Is he gaining weight consistently?
Yeah.
So there's something called a happy spitter, where there's some babies, and we're going to talk about this a lot more in the reflex section. So I'm going to kind of describe what's happening physiologically and why these things happen and when to be concerned. So we'll definitely be going into all of that. But the main thing that you need to pay attention to or note is, are we still gaining weight or are we falling behind? So that's the most important thing. As long as we're gaining weight, we can sort out the issues that are frustrating, but it sounds like the baby is still safe. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So they usually will self-regulate. There are some babies who don't have that off switch, where if you just keep putting more bottles in their mouth, they'll just eat until they explode. But most babies will be like, I'm done. And that can be different volumes at different times. They may be sleepy and you might need to try and keep them up, but if it's not that they're sleepy, they'll stop when they're kind of done. So if he seems still interested, rooting around, looking, you can offer more, but if he's just kind of snoozing and wants to be done, then he's probably full enough. You can also kind of just put your hand on the tummy and feel, does it feel like the belly's full or tight, or does it feel like still just as soft as before I started the feeding? So kind of assess the belly at the beginning of the feed, and then when he seems like he's done, feel the belly again and see if it feels like there's tummy full.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you want to use just a tight-fitted crib sheet with no extra pillows or blankets or stuffed animals in the bed. And as we all know, no secondhand smoke near the baby. Next slide. So these are...
Firsthand.
No, definitely not. So these are some examples of safe sleep for your baby. They have ones with the arms out, and then some people like to do this co-sleeping when they're right next to the baby. And as you can see, there's no pillows or blankets or anything else in the bed. You don't want to like overheat them.
You don't want anything to fall on their head that they can't get out of the way.
Yeah. So I know it's like winter time, so probably like think the baby will get cold, but just remember not to like, I think it's cultural too, like my culture, like Armenian, we like swaddle the baby a lot and stuff. Like you don't need to overdo it. And just keep the room temperature warm, like that's a typo. It should be
70 to 74.
yes. Keep the lights low.
70 to 74. Yes, the microphone didn't pick that up.
Oh, okay. Keep the lights low and avoid stimulating the baby during diaper changes, so that the baby will kind of know like, okay, it's time for bed now, and they'll associate like this is bedtime. You can like read them a story and make it part of your routine. Like it's good if you want to feed them after you give them a bath, and that way they're like nice and relaxed. And keep the baby upright after you feed them, so that like when you put them down to sleep that they don't spit up. And also a good thing is a wedge if your baby has reflux. Like I know a lot of babies have reflux, so that's okay, and it's fine to, I think you can go to the next slide. I think I have some examples. So you can also use a boppy.
They actually make a boppy specifically to lay in after a feeding. It's not to sleep in, but it's to position them in the proper angle after a feeding until you can then lay them flat.
And then if you notice like your baby has a lot of reflux, another good trick is pacifiers can help the contraction of the esophagus to encourage like the downward motility. And
Next slide.
I think that's the last slide.
Okay. So kind of in the same vein, let's jump into the reflux talk, and we can talk a little bit more about all this. So